Brought to you by MuleSoft. Visit MuleSoft.com to find out how MuleSoft's API-led approach to connecting apps, data, and the Internet of Things can revolutionize your businesses.
Hi, I'm David Berlin, Editor-in-Chief of ProgrammableWeb.com, here with a special edition of the Developers Rock podcast. Now, every month in Washington, D.C., there is a special meetup that takes place on the first Tuesday of the month. It is the DC Area API Meetup, and this is where many of the technologists from across the federal government get together to talk about what works and what doesn't work in the way of providing APIs from government agencies, not only for internal consumption by developers, but for external consumption as well. Now, if you're interested in attending that meetup, I suggest you go to meetup.com and search for it by searching DC API User Group. And if you go to that webpage, you'll find not only the upcoming meetup and who will be speaking at it, but you may even find a schedule and other users who are attending the meetup. If you want to find out more about the meetup, you can go there. You can also go to the meetup's Twitter feed at DC_API_meetup as the Twitter handle. So I hope to see you there at the meetup. Meanwhile, what we decided to do is we're going to record all of the different presentations and publish them not only to ProgrammableWeb, but also to ProgrammableWeb's YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/ProgrammableWeb. These presentations will not only include what the speaker is saying, but you'll be able to see their slides as well. And if you go to the version that's on ProgrammableWeb.com, we'll include a full transcript of everything the presenter said. So I encourage you to check those out. So for now, I'm going to let you go and watch this next presentation that was filmed at the DC API User Group Meetup. Thanks very much, and I'll see you soon.
So my name is Trevor Bryant. I am a security-minded DevOps nerd. So yeah, I've been doing, I like to fall more in the information security rather than cybersecurity. I'm not too into the offensive or defensive operations. It's more things like FedRAMP, meeting regulatory compliance. The number one rule of FISMA is actually cost-effective security. So we have to design, build, and implement information systems in the government that also meet a cost-effective security objective. And I mentioned FedRAMP again, but it's really interesting going through FedRAMP. It's rather than a traditional assessment and authorization process, which is part of the risk management framework underneath FISMA, it's you trade administrative overhead from rather than having something on-prem to in somebody else's data center, which is pretty interesting and significantly more expensive. Turns out you might get a budget for $300,000 to migrate your application from on-prem to something that's FedRAMP cloud service provider, and then you find out your 3PAO is $300,000. So that's got to go back next year and ask for more money, and then work on your project plan to eventually get to the cloud in 5 years in the government. I think Gray is probably one of the few that knows the struggle of that.
That's why I drink.
Actually, it's true. I've known him for several years, and pretty much all we do is drink. So the night of NIST part, it turns out if you spend an entire weekend reading about FIPS, encryption, and then you go back to Ron Ross's team and you email them that you found a lot of contradictions and you're not really sure what you're supposed to follow, they'll just respond back and like, we hate it when you do this, but stick with the latest round of guidance. And in this case, it was like, so what am I supposed to have FIPS enabled? You're saying that we're supposed to have the data encrypted and transport, and that's sufficient enough. But then over here in all of these STIGs, you're saying that we have to do everything in the operating system. The operating system has to inherit it. And they're like, damn it, Trevor. So I've always been an auditor and an analyst and an engineer. Now I'm finally an architect. Evidently, when you get that rise to the title, you get more interesting conversations. And I've been getting a lot more into technical policy. There's things like the DCOI, the Data Center Optimization Initiative. Cloud Smart just came out, which is going back to more of the cybersecurity focus, and then also the workforce provided in that with the government. This past weekend, we actually had the President's Cup Cybersecurity Challenge competition or something like that. They basically took a generic capture the flag sort of challenge where we're all like hacking into a system, finding vulnerabilities, exploiting things, finding strings or credentials, and then eventually working our way to a defined string, which is like flag, and then in curly brackets is like some leet speak, and then you go and enter that into a Jeopardy style board, and then you get points. So the president actually came out with one last year, came out with the executive order last year, and then we finally got to play it this weekend, and it was a lot of fun and also pretty interesting. I'm also an instructor at DC Tool, and that's the open organization of lockpickers. We have a meetup tomorrow, 6:30 at the boardroom, which is just right up the street. We'll teach you ethical lock sport. We'll teach you the first 2 rules and all the laws, depending on what state you're in. We're in DC, so we're okay. You don't have to prove that you're not a criminal if you have a lockpick set on you. And just have a couple drinks and pick some locks. Just meet people. Just pop locks. I'm also a conference organizer and volunteer, so if you have been to the DevOps DC Meetup, I'm one of the organizers for there, or the DevOps Days Conference, at least for the DC chapter. Also involved in a lot of the B-Sides organizations, which is literally like a flip of the deck. If you don't want to make it to DEF CON, or you can't get into a talk, or you want to speak, and these conferences have like thousands of people submitting, but only 12 can speak. There's the B-Sides, which are seemingly there's over 260 now in just about every major city, so no matter where you go. Besides Augusta is about to come up, and they're just really fun conferences in general. And there's my website. So Gray asked me to come in, talk about API, and I was like, oh, I'm a security person, I'll come and talk about API security. And this entire weekend I've spent just nothing but Googling and learning about API security. And this is what I realized I know about myself is, as a security architect, I know so little about APIs. I mean, nobody watches Game of Thrones? No? Dumbledore dies. So I always start off with a Google image search, like, oh, I like that prettiness. I'm going to go find a website or some YouTube video that just appeals aesthetically, and I'm going to start there and go read, and I'm going to go search my favorite government website, because being a nerd in the government, I like to stick with those government definitions. And so I went to NIST, and this is what I found. Awesome, right? Yeah. What? So that was just fumbling around for 5 minutes, and I'm doing a lot of this. Does it work? Yes. Trying to find around an API security checklist, because my ultimate goal here is, can I find government standards that are used by the government on APIs? And if I can find standards, then maybe I can find security checklist. And instead, I find this GitHub repository that has a long list of just checks and balances to go through. Like, maybe you should use OAuth or something else. Don't let data go in plain text. Don't have thing. Actually, I have a really good slide for that. I'll get back to that. Input and processing have just high-level stuff here. And I was like, JWT, what is that? So then I had to go learn about that. And then I go to OWASP, so they just had AppSec 2019 in Amsterdam, and I think they had AppSec here in DC some months ago, or maybe last month, but they have, so they come out every year with the top 10 OWASP security recommendations, which could be similar to the CIS top 10 or 20 recommendations for security as well. But what I notice a lot here is that, or things I already know, which is APIs expose a lot of data. And this made me realize, or maybe remember that one of my favorite websites here to practice how bad I am at penetration testing has a little challenge to get into it, right? You have to generate your own invite code. And by doing, I'll look at the source code, and then I see something particularly interesting, which is the make invite code. And then execute the make invite code, and then we get a base64 encoded string, which I load up in CyberChef and decode, and it has further instructions. And then I make a post, and it comes back with more base64 encoded string, and there's my invite code. It's like, okay, maybe I do know a little bit more about API security than I thought, which is actually just how to abuse it. But how do I actually protect it? Where do I go and find how recommendations or guidelines of how to protect this? So I go back to OWASP, and I find this cheat sheet series that they have this entire project for. And I think this is relatively new because I didn't find this about 6-7 months ago when I first started this effort. And they have so many things listed that made me realize, like, I won't know or how to become an expert about this overnight. I was really hoping for like an easy button. Sometimes you can go to any of these NIST special publications and just Control F to victory, and be able to just take out all of the statements and throw them up on a slide and be like, this is what I know. So breaking it back down to the top 10, then I realized here's something I can actually work with. This is more the language I speak, security misconfigurations. I know that Verizon puts out a breach report every year, and 99% of all breaches are due to a misconfiguration. It's like, okay, well, the Capital One thing came out a few months ago, and that made me realize two things, which is nobody still truly understands how the cloud works. And if a web application firewall is redirecting commands to an API gateway and it's accepting just about any command, then maybe we want some input validation in there. I've had been having a lot of conversations actually about the Capital One thing, because people are coming and asking me, like, isn't AWS supposed to be secure? I'm like, yes, AWS is secure for AWS, not what's above AWS. That's what you're supposed to secure. So I continue searching NIST, and what I find for APIs is security strategies for microservices. And I'm like, okay, well, we're doing a lot more research on Kubernetes. We're looking at how to implement these things in the government. If you're familiar with OpenShift has Kubernetes inside of it, but with a FIPS certified cipher, so you can actually use it in the government. And a lot of those are just things talking to other things. But what I see a lot here in this publication is microservices. And so this entire thing is focused on microservices and isn't really teaching me so much about an API or where to find standards on an API or where to find how to secure an API. So I go to the TTS chat that Gray invited me to like forever ago. And so I just ask a generic question and I get a lot of responses back. And so somebody pointed me to the cheat sheet series by OWASP, and then there was a lot of internal back and forth. By the way, this is public, so this is why I took screenshots. And so the summary of my journey here, it's like 30 hours this weekend is what I spent on this, probably, is the OWASP has an API security check project, and they also have their cheat sheet series project, which is extensive, and so I'm going to be spending a lot more time there. You see it now? Yeah. But also, if you know Gray, evidently Gray's might be publishing an entire federal standard on how to use APIs in the government. Maybe it's somewhere in here. Yeah.
This is an outstanding way to pressure me to follow up on a commitment if you ever want to.
This was.
Get me to write it down somewhere, and then later that day, in a presentation, like post a screenshot of that.
Yeah.
That's bad.
So he told me anywhere between 8 to 12 minutes, so that's what I built my presentation for. But the whole theme of this was, as a security person who's supposed to know this, where the hell do I go to learn about this? There has to be somewhere better than just Ask Gray.
Yeah.
I mean, you can only buy him so many beers, right?
Not true.
So, if you'd like to drop some knowledge on me, after you realize this is one of those presentations where the speaker made it for the speaker and not for the audience. So, like, where would I go out and find how to learn more about APIs? I've exhausted the resources that I know of. I always start with the government. There's this man right here that everybody's pointing to. Or if you just have any general questions for me, I can tell you a lot about lockpicking, or I can tell you a lot about FedRAMP or FISMA, or traditional assessment and authorizations process, which is called the ATO process now. But when it comes to APIs, my response is still Ask Gray.